Is ketamine the new wonder drug for mood disorders?
I remember using ketamine on children in the ER when I was starting my practice. And then it became the preferred party drug. And now we're hearing that it's the holy grail of mental health. Is there really something to this? Or is it another case of people trying to pretend that their favorite recreational drug is good for them?
Welcome to Doctors Rating Trends. This is a show where two Ivy trained physicians dissect the latest buzz so you can decide what's hype and what's help. My job is to find all of the real evidence backing up each medical trend.
And I'll stress test the claims. In the end, we'll help you figure out what is real and what's just an expensive gimmick.
Let's get into it. First, let's talk a little bit about what ketamine is and its history. Ketamine is a powerful anesthetic that has been used in surgery and procedures since 1970. It has a powerful dissociative effect that stops people from feeling their pain. Ketamine has an interesting story in surgery. It replaced PCP as the preferred anesthetic in the 1970s when doctors discovered it had similar effect, but without as many negative side effects as PCP. The first studies were on prisoners in the 1960s who described feeling floating and numbness in their limbs. And it was eventually useful in the fields in Vietnam on injured soldiers. Since the invention of propofol in the late 70s, the use of ketamine has become somewhat limited. It is preferred on children and in some outpatient procedures on adults because it doesn't depress the respiratory system. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there is a surge of recreational users of ketamine. On a personal note, this is also around the time that people stopped it being fun at concerts. Concerts used to look like this. And now it looks like a bunch of dissociated zombies. You know, the slow-moving kind. Let's talk about ketamine and mental health. The recreational ketamine users that graduated from medical school started wondering if they could make that party drug a legitimate therapy. So let's break it down by each one of the mental disorders to see if that's true. The first major studies for ketamine were on treatment-resistant depression. That's the kind of depression that all other drugs fell at. And this started in 2000. A randomized controlled trial showed that ketamine has rapid antidepressant effects that were comparable to antidepressant medications. The difference is that the ketamine actually works fast. Most antidepressants take weeks to months to kick in, but ketamine has an impact in a day or two. Since then, studies have confirmed this powerful impact on depression. As recently as 2023, a study showed that ketamine works as well as electric shock therapy in treatment-resistant depression, only with much better side effect profile. Electric shock therapy is a dramatic approach of sending very high voltage to the brain to rewire the circuits when all else fails. It was made famous in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Here we go.
The downside of having a drug that is widely available on the black market is that people are self-treating. Ketamine treatment happens under the supervision of clinicians because of potentially dangerous side effects. Elevated blood pressure, loss of balance and control, and the infamous K-hole, which you completely lose touch with reality, are all risks while taking ketamine unsupervised. A good example of this is what happened to Matthew Perry, who dropped deep into a K-hole while in a hot tub and drowned. There are pill mill doctors that will prescribe the medication irresponsibly, as we saw with the opioid epidemic, so be careful who your clinician is. Another issue with ketamine is that you become tolerant over time, so doses become larger and harder to manage.
One of the really positive things about having a fast-acting antidepressant like ketamine is that it becomes very useful for the most dangerous form of depression, which is suicidality, and is something that needs to be taken care of very, very fast. Multiple meta-analyses since 2020 have showed rapid reduction in suicidal ideation within 24 hours after taking ketamine, although it's important to note that the effects may be transient and data on attempted suicides remains limited. Clinical guidance treats it as a bridge and not a standalone fix.
This looks like a great treatment for this disorder. Just remember, if you're feeling suicidal, seek treatment from a professional immediately. Don't go try to drop into a K-hole at a rave.
Let's talk about ketamine for PTSD. So far, there's pretty variable data on this one. Some studies showed benefit versus a drug called midazolam and showed a reduction of symptom severity over several weeks. Other studies did show some benefit.
However, there was a study in 2022 which called into question the earlier results for PTSD and showed a variable effect using a true placebo, saline. The conclusion of the study is that other studies are needed and that this is a very complicated condition to treat.
Let's talk a little bit about ketamine and addiction. Given that ketamine rewires your mental circuits so well, it would make sense that it's useful in addiction. One randomized controlled trial of ketamine combined with therapy showed that there's greater abstinence after 6 months than a control arm. Larger studies are now being done to confirm these results, especially in the UK, but so far it isn't standard of care.
The results of this trial are promising, but it's still early on. I'm not sure how you can have a randomized controlled trial with ketamine since the sensation of ketamine is unmistakable. So it makes it difficult to have a placebo arm in studies.
Let's talk about microdosing as a form of self-treatment. First, we need to define what microdosing is. Microdosing is taking a small enough amount of a drug that you don't feel high, but hope that you capture the upside benefits. There's studies in controlled environments that show that microdosing has some positive benefit on depression, but not so much yet for anxiety or PTSD. There's also no studies showing that microdosing improves cognitive performance in healthy individuals.
It doesn't stop tech bros and creatives from taking small doses, hoping that it will show their brains new pathways for success. There are a few things that are very important to understand with microdosing. The body does build up a tolerance to ketamine, which means you need more and more of it to have any sort of an impact. And that microdose becomes a macrodose over time.
Finally, let's talk about full dose recreational use. People take ketamine for its drunk-like psychological effects. Especially now that people are looking for alcohol substitutes, ketamine has become a regular alternative. Many will also use it to dissociate in the evenings and relax.
Chronic usage has a number of downsides. The most documented side effect is chronic cystitis. This is an inflammation and ulceration of the bladder and urinary tract that can lead to pain and potential permanent damage. There's also suspicion that chronic heavy usage can lead to memory impairment and loss of executive function, but that is yet to be confirmed.
So how does ketamine work for depression and mental health? The details are complicated, but the high-level explanation is that during depression, your brain creates a negative circuits of thoughts and feelings that gets deeper and harder to get out of the more you're depressed. Basically, you're creating stronger and stronger negative pathways that create a rut. Ketamine blocks those pathways and floods your brain with transmitters that stimulate new circuits to be made. This happens quickly and lasts for a number of days. However, if you don't do the work to reinforce those new positive pathways, you can drop back into the rut and become depressed again. The same sorts of neurons that emotionally attach you to your negative thoughts also attach you to caring about pain. That is why at very high doses, ketamine can work as a powerful pain blockade. The exact mechanism is fascinating, but requires a graduate degree in neurobiology. If you want to know more, we've added some YouTube links in the description.
I came to this video highly skeptical about ketamine. This is part of a recent push in medicine to look for medical rationale for all of our favorite drugs. This reminds me of the medical studies that tried to convince us that marijuana was going to cure all of our mental health problems. Rather than focusing on a problem and trying to find drugs to treat it, we focused on a drug people like to smoke, and we're looking for treatments that could justify its usage.
Are you sure you're not suffering from anything else like, back pain?
Nope.
Anxiety?
Cool as a cucumber.
How about insomnia?
Sleep like a baby.
If you have back pain or anxiety or anything else that I can't test for, then I can give you this prescription for cannabis right now.
We are seeing the same thing now with mushrooms, MDMA, and I'm guessing we're going to see a great medicinal hype around cocaine in the next few years. So I was surprised to find that ketamine had some legitimate benefits with some good science behind it.
On these programs, we speak frequently about how effective therapies with limited financial upside seem to be passed over by the medical community. So maybe it took a drug that people wanted to use recreationally to get those studies done. That said, for depression and related psychological illnesses, it's excellent and has been repeated multiple times in studies. It is good to have a drug that is relatively safe with a reasonable side effect profile for mental health. Many of the current drugs on the market come with significant downsides.
It should be emphasized, though, that self-treatment should be avoided, and we still don't know what the long-term effects are for chronic usage. One constant theme with almost all drugs is that there is no free lunch. We know about potentially devastating effects on the bladder and the urinary tract, but the potential long-term mental effects should concern everyone.
It's remarkable how many people I meet who take ketamine on a nightly basis. Rewiring a bad circuit makes a lot of sense, but to be in a constant state of rewiring can't be a good thing. Beyond the documented side effects, we also have some high-profile cases that people should think about, like Matthew Perry, that just highlighted how dangerous this drug can be. Let's do a quick summary of the positives and negatives of ketamine. The benefits are strong data on resistant treatment depression, suicidality, and some moderate data coming out on PTSD and addiction.
The downsides include elevated blood pressure, dizziness, quick tolerance in some cases, and urinary tract damage.
Okay, let's go to the scorecard. This is a well-documented mechanism of action that makes sense. I think that the data backing up that mechanism of action for, especially depression is really, really good. And the data just keeps building all the time. And then finally, would I take it? Absolutely. If I had treatment-resistant depression, I'd go right to it. It has very little downside, especially if used clinically well, with some really, really good data behind it.
For the common sense test, like I said earlier, I was skeptical in the beginning, going into it, knowing the motivations. But once I found out the mechanism and what it was being treated for or used for, common sense test made sense. Solid evidence. There's shockingly good evidence around treatment of depression, especially. And then would I do it only for the indication of depression? In terms of performance-related things and a lot of things that are out there in the culture where people are taking it for creativity, I don't think there's any data there yet.
Great. If you liked what you saw in this program, please remember to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe.
Remember that this is for entertainment and informational purposes only. If you are going to do a treatment, you need to consult with your physician. And then if you have any comments, we'd love to hear them. And also if you have any other ideas for videos.
See you next time.